Fry, and you are listening to the We Fucking Told You So podcast. Today is January 13th, 2025, and today's installment is titled, Without Affordable Healthcare, No One is Safe. Neither political party, Democratic or Republican, is doing anything to prevent healthcare and health insurance companies from engaging in predatory and lethal practices. It goes without saying that Republicans have done nothing to fix the healthcare system in the USA. More than 8 years after they tried over and over again to repeal the Affordable Care Act, the most they can muster is a vacuous claim of an unspecified concept of a plan to replace it. That should come as no surprise, because Republicans have never done anything to actually try to help people other than the already mega rich. With that Republican track record, you'd have to be a special kind of stupid to believe they'll ever do anything to fix healthcare, particularly when they're actively working to make it worse by trying to privatize Medicare. For that reason, this edition of We Fucking Told You So podcast and blog will focus on the party that claims to be the party of the people, the Democrats, who've really done jack shit to fix healthcare either. Oh, we can hear some of you now screaming that Obama got the Affordable Care Act passed, but before we go deeper into that, we have to point out that in order to get it passed, they needed to ditch the public option, which could have provided health care for people who could not afford to pay the exorbitant insurance premiums found in the various marketplaces. As a result, the ACA was successful at getting more people insured, but insured with plans they can barely afford and that often fail to really cover their health care needs. In other words, the ACA brought more prey into the game from which the healthcare providers and insurance companies can extract wealth. That's why healthcare and insurance companies continue to rake in record profits since the passage of the ACA. It got more people some minimal coverage and made very wealthy people much, much wealthier. In terms of making healthcare affordable for people, the ACA did little and may have actually made things worse. And here, we're going to digress and let me, Mike Fry, the host of the podcast, share a couple of recent examples of personal experiences with healthcare and insurance in the USA. I promise to keep it short. The first took place in Palm Springs a few years ago in California. While I was on vacation, I developed a severe case of pneumonia, and after trying to avoid going to the doctor for too long, I ended up going to Desert Regional Medical Center for an emergency visit. I had a very high fever and severe difficulty breathing, and all they really did for me was give me a COVID test and a dose of Tylenol for the fever, and then sent me home with instructions to keep taking more Tylenol. Because they didn't address the underlying root cause, the pneumonia, the Tylenol would temporarily lower my fever by causing severe body sweats that evaporated and lowered my temperature, but then the fever would simply spike right back up to 104. And each time I took the Tylenol, I was growing increasingly more and more dehydrated because of the massive body sweating. And I couldn't drink enough water to keep up with that ongoing fluid loss. And so as a result, my condition was getting worse and worse, to the point where my fever would spike to 104. I would take the drug, and then it would drop rapidly down to about 96 degrees. I was reaching the life-threatening ranges of high and low end of the temperature spectrum and continuing to get worse. Days later, and barely able to speak, I returned to the ER at the Desert Regional Medical Center. only to be told to take more Tylenol. I refused and demanded more service, and eventually they agreed to give me a chest x-ray, one single view. They also gave me another COVID test. They gave me some IV fluids, one bag of lactated ringers that any of us can buy online today for $8. They also gave me a dose of an antibiotic because the x-ray determined that I should have known after my first visit that I didn't have COVID, I had pneumonia. At the end, I received maybe, if I'm really generous, about $300 worth of services. Yet Desert Regional Medical Center billed my insurance company more than $18,000 for those little bits of service. And my insurance company, Health Partners, paid nearly all of that bill against my protestations. While complaining to multiple people at Health Partners, they kept asking why I was complaining. They said, covering most of the bill. They said I had nothing to complain about. But that was a lie, I told them. I'm covering the bill with my insurance premiums that I pay to them with an agreement that they'll monitor and oversee overcharging by healthcare providers. But they don't really do that, and the Affordable Care Act is one of the reasons why. That's because the Affordable Care Act requires health insurance companies spend between 80% and 85% of the money they collect in premiums paying medical bills. That means the profit that they can make is directly tied to the billing healthcare companies produce. The higher the billing, the more profits the insurers can make. As a result, the insurance companies we assume are watching out for predatory billing from healthcare providers are providing an incentive to not keep a fiduciary eye on the predatory billing. They can raise their premiums and profits to the moon so long as healthcare providers bill enough, which brings me to my example number 2. I recently realized that I had an undiagnosed hernia that needed to be surgically repaired. I knew that because I had had one repaired previously and the symptoms were unmistakable. I called Health Partners Surgery Center that had done the prior hernia repair to see if I could get an estimate for the cost. I had a new insurance plan and simply wanted to know what it was going to cost me to get my hernia repaired. The estimate that I got, which, by the way, did not include anesthesia, which, of course, is required, was more than $28,000. The estimate for my out-of-pocket cost was between $5,000 and $8,000, again, not including anesthesia. But it turns out that I can buy that same surgery in Canada without insurance for about the same amount of money, but with the anesthesia actually included. I get my insurance through my husband's former employer. Collectively, we pay about $1,800 each month to be, quote, fully insured. Yet the money we spend on premiums doesn't actually provide us much coverage for anything at all when you look at it from that perspective. As a result of the estimate I got from Health Partners, I sent a complaint with some pointed questions to them, and to my surprise, I got a response back from their head of patient experience, in which he carefully explained that the costs in Canada and the USA can't be compared because they're different systems. In Canada, for example, he said, the government carefully regulates costs. He went on to explain that there's no such regulatory system here in the USA. The healthcare and the insurance companies all get together and agree on what to charge, which to me sounds a lot like price fixing. In the end, the letter I received from Health Partners amounted to a long-winded way of saying that they charge $28,000 for an $8,000 surgery because in the USA, they can. And no one, Democrat or Republican, is doing a damn thing about any of that. And the little things the Democrats have tried to do, like passing the Affordable Care Act, have really just swept more and more people into that very broken, predatory system, further enriching the predators who run those organizations. The thing that gets me most is the fact that I'm one of the lucky ones. I take good care of myself. I have no chronic or accidental conditions. I rarely need to see a doctor for anything. And until recently, my insurance covered things I needed pretty well, even as the premiums skyrocketed. But I also know there's a lot of people who are not so lucky. After a simple medical issue, they end up being saddled with debt for the rest of their lives, or they can't afford the care and die, or have a loved one who dies. When Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, was shot dead in broad daylight on the streets of New York in December of 2024, a shocking number of people cheered. That tragic fact alone should be proof enough that our system isn't working, and neither party, Democratic or Republican, is doing jack shit to really fix anything. Which leads us to ponder one basic question. How many members of the House and Senate in Washington own stock in healthcare companies that would be affected if they actually did fix healthcare? I think we all likely know the answer to that question, which is one of the reasons Democrats and Republicans alike smear people like Bernie Sanders when he points out that the USA is the only nation in the top 34 nations in the world that is yet to provide universal health care. That isn't even considering all the cash they get in donations to their campaigns from the lobbyists and healthcare corporations. You've been listening to the We Fucking Told You So podcast. Please like and subscribe and share on your social media. Thanks for listening.